The Arrival of the Extraterrestrials. Antonio.P. Copyright author, layout, and cover design. Antonio.P. Published in March 2011. Foreword. The aim of this book is not the mere entertainment of the reader there who can be considered a science fiction novel, but it is the result of 20 years of research both in the field of philosophy and science. I want to emphasize at the outset that my intention is not to impose my views to anyone. If that were so, it would have been easy to say that this knowledge has been given me by divine inspiration or something similar. Quite the contrary, my intention is to open the ability of people to disagree with anything that does not convince them. Many people from time immemorial have tried to find the keys to unite science and religion without success may be achieved with this book. I encourage the reader to assess freely these writings with the hope that you can contribute something positive in your life. Like everyone commit successes and mistakes in my scientific claims, but after all the progress is to replace a good idea on the other better. I would also like to explain what from my point of view the mission of aliens on Earth. Everyone may freely form an opinion about it in the hands of readers I leave. This book has been translated from the original Spanish version. Chapter 1, Home Planet. Makes this about 15,000 years to a distant star located about 100 light-years from Earth. There was coming to maturity of its evolution a planet similar to ours. Let's call this world the original planet, as this is the beginning of this story. After many centuries of wars and conflicts, planet finally reached a situation of political stability and peace prolonged. This was mainly due to 4 causes. Political unification of the planet. Natality control. End of the pace of technological progress had reached its main development. Full development of the planet in the philosophical and moral aspect. Unification of the planet. In the background, the origin of wars is one of its main aspects. The desire of states to cover the entire planetary territory by force is, peacefully, whenever the world is experiencing a technological changes the order powers, and this results in the country's attempt favored by attempting to change overrule others. However, when a planet completes its development at the end, usually the peaceful union of states occurs by creating a common government for all. Following is the development of a common language to reduce the distances between people. This would not be an absolutist government, but each state would retain a certain degree of autonomy. This unification would create a certain peace of mind that would move to other expectations. Birth control. It is impossible for a planet that is limited in geographical space can afford to have an unlimited population growth in the 20th and then century. This caused deep demagogues among those who argued that birth control was necessary and who said that the planet always absorbed any increase in population. But the truth is that only with the limitation to 2 children per couple is possible that the resources of society reach everyone in a sustainable manner. It is also true that social services should guarantee work and housing for all citizens. On Earth there are many people who believe that ensuring basic rights for all citizens eradicate privileges, but it is actually quite the opposite. The best way to keep a privilege is not picking on the poor. Defend a market economy, but eradicating poverty, ensure centuries of progress that implanted societies. Of course, those citizens who refused to accept state aid could not expect favoritism. End of progress. With this title I am not referring to the absolute end of progress, rather I mean the end of a historical process of evolution which initially starts off slow and then increasingly accelerated almost to a halt again. This marks the time when a planet reaches maturity. This on Earth could be in the 25th century, although it is impossible to know exactly. The end of technological progress is followed by moral progress, since this is more complex than the last. Moral progress. The key to moral progress is to assume that a civic behavior is the only solution to enable coexistence in a composed of millions of individuals society. It is imperative to eradicate despotic behavior on citizens to achieve this end. Vanity and arrogance are as diseases of the mind, but unlike other cured only with a firm attitude and little permissive governments before them, weak policies that apply to offenders only get strengthened. This requires that civil liberties are developed at its best, so that only go to jail the real criminals. Failure to observe this only leads to the development of mafias as occurred in the United States with prohibition. The idea of heaven, All cultures have some form of philosophy from heaven as a place where one goes after death if you have lived a righteous life. This actually stems from the intuitive idea that every society progresses to find a technological balance and finally peace is. Rather than being a person who acts correctly, it is the sum of all individual correct behavior which leads to this result. Cyclicality. The universe. Eternal life and spirit. In the 20th century it was argued heatedly about what is life and what is not. This is stupid root. It was said that the matter is not life but begets life. As you can sustain such barbarity by a scientific community that is seen evolved, the only way that is possible is that matter also be life. Matter is life but in a state other than the organic call, which best could be called biological. Contradistinction to the above, what happens is that the mineral life state needs to be refined in the formation of biological structures to evolve, i.e. need to form plants, animals, and people. The reason is simple. Life in mineral state is very crude in its approach, and development of biological structures allows the reincarnation of mineral life in organic forms, which makes life more interesting, partly because of the repetitive cycle life and death, so the new birth life begins again and everything is lived to its fullest again. The reincarnation of the spirit in the body involves attaching the East with the matter, which results in a more intense life expectations realization, because of the new sensations that matter brings to continually spirit as it is not part of he. This is because everything in the universe is cyclical. Everything is repeated again in an eternal process in which the same time start again from the beginning. Eternal life of the spirit. In the same way that matter is neither created nor destroyed, life in its essence either, if the matter is life and matter in their energy state is eternal, just as life is eternal, therefore death it's just a mere formality for the spirit, as this is eternal life cannot arise from death. The origin of life. This is the most complex questions of the universe, so you cannot expect me a great answer about say that like life, that matter is not created nor destroyed only transformed. Matter and vacuum form a binomial so that the vacuum no matter or material without the vacuum is not possible, arguably is a binary relationship of the polarities of nature are derived. The universe continues indefinitely in a process of creating worlds and destroying them, until the time, at the same time starts again from the beginning is over. In this cyclic process all beings are immersed and all experiences cosmos and are experienced by all in a process of continuous renewal. Living things in their essence can be divided into two groups, the planetary beings, leading to the formation of stars and planets and represent only 1% of the total, and spiritual beings, representing 99 remaining. Planetary beings are responsible for sustaining the spiritual cosmos and are responsible for developing the organic life evolved as human in order to reincarnate her later. Therefore it is no more than the other minerals. Planetary beings exist only in a very basic level, controlling the operation of the atoms without interfering with the lives of people. Eventually they rotate functions and perform the functions of each other, particularly in the next cosmic cycle. In this context God is nothing but the set of universal laws that among all beings are generated, although more accurately expressed through the planetary beings. Who comes to life, it is because he was formerly also live spiritually in the cosmos. Everything is life, even planets, and are living stars, but in a mineral form. Would be stupid to think that the Earth could move through space from 5 billion years ago while defending that has no life itself. What kind of scientists have to defend such a thing? Are also naive who care to get eternal life of the body. They do not realize they already have a spirit that is. The philosophy of justice. The discovery by the society of the cyclical nature of the universe and reach the conviction of the eternal life of the spirit, would lead to a revolution in the moral aspect of humanity. The question is simple: what sense does resort to violence as long as the cyclical nature of the universe will someday all live the same situations in life? When the universe begins again, life experiences will be invested and every human being will live the experiences of the other. Everything in the cosmos there is life, even planets are living in a way, and life is eternal because life is energy. Through the indefinite repetition of the universe all live every experience. In this case no longer makes sense to harm anyone, since this would go against oneself. This does not mean that the cyclical nature of the universe is the only way to do justice, since justice we might call police, it represents the most obvious way to punish improper behavior. Arguably police justice, i.e. which is made with immediate effect through self-defense, or that takes place across the state, accounting for up to 85% of what you can do in the appearance of justice, is this aspect which should eradicate from society despotic behavior and vanity in humans, taught from childhood that a civic behavior is essential if you want to maintain cohesive a composite society million in all the cities. What brings the cyclical nature of the universe is to eliminate those fringes that might be whether the concept of justice arises from the other mode, thus giving rise to what we might call full justice. It is true that you can get very far with education and progress in this field, but it is up to each consider whether the two concepts of justice are true or just one. This would result in the arrival of a genuine democracy in society, in which the citizen is no longer limited to one vote every 4 years, but rather decide each and every one of the laws. Chapter 2, The Journey. From this point the planet reached a great stability and began to consider expansion space. That said, we must clarify that in the cosmos there is only an evolved species that is human, there are not many intelligent species as we see in doing science fiction movies. In the same way that if a stone into the water pulled this down to the bottom to be more dense, just as an evolving planet in the end only the triumph of the human species, because it is the most successful to develop a fully sort mode. It is at this time, when the original planet discovered the land and plans to send an expedition to it were established, they would be mainly two reasons. On the one hand, study the Earth's evolution and compare it with his own. And on the other, contribute as much as possible to human evolution, but without interference, i.e. an indirect way for land to develop itself. A planet would lose his freedom if he will impose the ideas, the Earth has to find their own way. For this trip were used so-called generation ships, i.e. ships that the crew would marry and have children, living a normal life until they reach their destination. Contrary to popular belief on Earth, is not necessary for a spacecraft to travel very fast through space to reach a planet, the key is not on speed, but on the living conditions on the ship. People on Earth cannot conceive of space travel rather than a quick trips, and especially in small ships. Actually, for interstellar travel required ships of up to several kilometers in size are forming a space community. These ships would not exceed 15% of the speed of light, only energetic particles reach the speed of light. The more inert and material is an object, the slower it, so this speed would be cruising speed of the fastest ships. By using nuclear power, ship an indefinite power supply would be ensured all the way. Do not forget that in space this is the only energy that can be used, for being the ship far from the sun, the trip, and could last several centuries, still lifelike on the planet of origin, the expedition could have 20,000 people in a dozen ships. The period in space. As I mentioned before, space travel are not characterized by the speed at which ships move, and interstellar travel cannot speak for periods of years but generations. Typically, when an expedition reaches its destination, they have passed a minimum of 30 years shorter trips, traveling at cruising speed 15% of the speed of light. To make this possible you cannot use any type of ship's large city, with which to carry the same kind of life they would have on Earth. A space community of about 10 ships whose dimensions as are necessary oscillate between 200 meters and the kilometer and a half. Of course these ships have a system of artificial gravity that allow them to feel at home planet. They would marry, have children on board ships, and could travel occasionally to other ships that would form the expedition. To scroll through space is also feasible scales. A ship can start a colony on a distant planet than their own, and after a transitional period of a century or two to start again another colonial expedition to another star with some of the descendants who would have developed on this planet. For these journeys use nuclear energy, as among the stars is the only energy that can be used because of the remoteness of the Sun, thus the possibility of sending expeditions to very large distances becomes a reasonable option. On Earth, generations succeed one another without leaving the planet, and this is not considered as something strange. Then travel in mother ships would be exactly the same. Greater energy savings for all materials be recycled and nothing would be thrown into space. Months these ships would accelerate just a few tenths of a acceleration force, to acquire the necessary speed without forcing the structure, which would be very slight. In this kind of society would not exist humanoid robots, because as I told before, the human form is the sum of a body and a spirit. It makes no sense to wait for a machine that is as a man, unless harbored a spirit, but that is already the man. Robots are rather a way of playing with the idea of slavery, which from my point of view is entirely reprehensible. Raw materials. Food. Obtaining food for these ships need not take plants or animals on board, since this is a primitive way of thinking about supply. Rather, this is achieved by producing synthetic form. This does not mean that it is taking pills. Food would have the same or similar characteristics as those derived from plants, can be manufactured vitamins, protein, or fiber artificially. The devices. All technological devices would be recycled after use without wasting anything, spending the minimum energy in rebuilding, and some metal or crystal structures could be reused in new equipment, thus achieving additional energy savings. In the end, no waste product would be thrown into space, since all waste, if necessary, be reduced to its essential chemical principles. Energy. The fission of uranium or other nuclear fuel ensure the survival of this expedition almost indefinitely, although this dangerous energy in interstellar space is the only one that can be used. Black holes. Many people wonder what is the nature of black holes. Some think they are interdimensional holes, others think that the cosmos is swallowed. The truth is that all these black holes are simpler than we can imagine. The physics of black holes is actually the same as that of the stars and planets, i.e. are simply mass supercompressed. The only difference is that having such a huge mass, large pressures cause them to lose the atom's layer outer electron. Therefore, arguably a black hole is like a giant atomic nucleus. Furthermore, these objects in the cosmos do not cause any harm to the universal order, since they are necessary to give stability to galaxies. First, there are black holes in the galactic core, then the stars, then planets, lower pivots on a larger mass. Black holes do not emit light, or if so is very difficult to detect because of its enormous gravity. Of course, if a spaceship fell inside, would be destroyed immediately and atomic elements would be reduced to its most basic form. Ultimately, these objects, far from being monsters, they do is stabilize the galactic system. Not make much sense to believe that the enormous gravity of these objects could lead to a tear in the fabric of space. First, because space is not a tissue, it is absurd to think that something that is immaterial can be drilled. Secondly, because the seriousness of these objects are not applied from the top down but from all points towards the center. It is one thing to explain gravity. Example, a material sphere is used moving on a fabric which encircles another heavy object, and another is that it can be applied to a black hole, since in reality would be rather two positions opposed tissues, therefore assumed that pressure on fold space be annulled. Chapter 3. Activities in Ancient Times. The Earth. When the expedition reached the solar system, installing bases are organized, both the planets and the Earth and the Moon. From this moment it is when really begin its mission, beginning to take samples of plants and animals and also the study of human beings, if any. With respect to humans also exist the added task of carrying out follow-up work and guidance in the process of evolution. That does not mean they were to violate the interests of these, rather it would seek to provide a stimulus in progress in order to learn what they are able to assimilate. Egypt. On the banks of the Nile River was formed from time immemorial a farming community. Together that summer were the first societies of the earth to form a civilization around a control policy, harvests in a stable manner, and in 2000 BC these two communities were the vanguard of progress on earth and evolved in a calm manner. But in a relatively short period everything changed. The planet had several thousand years out of the last ice age, which meant that the temperature of the ground was rising steadily every century. Because of this, all North Africa began to desert quickly, leading to thousands of small ranchers and farmers to migrate to Egypt as the only way to survive. It was used by successive pharaohs to get a cheap labor and to thus develop his delusional idea of building the giant graves that were the pyramids. This climate change is the main reason that civilization has been gradually moving from south to north and has been the main cause of historical changes, and was first in Mesopotamia and Egypt, then Greece and Rome, then in Spain and France, and finally in England and the United States. For civilization I mean the forefront of this, not all civilization. Progress is always greater where the climate is more balanced. Atlantis. Approximately 1500 years before Christ, one of the most advanced civilizations was the Minoan on the island of Crete. He owed its high level of development mainly to being a strategic point for trade between Egypt and primitive Greece. But a geological event changed all of a sudden. A huge volcanic eruption on a nearby island called Terra caused an ash cloud that deposited in Crete and other islands damage irreparably crops and livestock. In some cases there were layers ash up to several meters thick. Hundreds of inhabitants of these islands fled in the few boats that might get. The last memory left with was the sight of their island disappearing under the waters of the sea. Of course this was just an optical phenomenon caused by the curvature of the earth. For those not accustomed to navigating, the sight of their island away from the base to the tip could lead to the idea that the island had sunk beneath the sea. The settlers who came to Greece after the disaster gave rise to the story of Atlantis transmitted to us by the philosopher Plato. Today we tend to think of Atlantis as such an advanced society that would spaceships among other technological objects. Nothing is further from reality. This civilization was indeed very advanced, but only from the point of view of the time in which it existed. Hebrew people. Like many other communities in North Africa, the Jewish people was also forced to emigrate to Egypt for the progressive impoverishment of the earth. But the problem of desertification was compounded by the volcanic disaster in the Mediterranean, the serious damage caused in agriculture rain laden with volcanic ash. This situation became increasingly untenable concentration of populations on the banks of the Nile. The alien community installed on the ground saw this as a good opportunity to start a training project philosophically of earthly society, and the Jewish people was the ideal for achieving this end. It is the alien community would guide and protect the Jews, and in return acquire these were their protector's commitment to follow his teachings. It is from this moment when they began to manifest to Moses and made a covenant with him. Epidemics, hunger and climatic disturbances did the rest, although the aliens had nothing to do with it. From there the Jewish people was guided and protected by they called angels, and change began to develop the commandments that they gave them. Although many give and take between these two communities, it is very difficult to coordinate two companies that carry an evolutionary difference 17,000 years. At night they are lit up with what they called a luminous cloud, but it was actually an aircraft camouflaged behind a cloud of steam. The idea of God. In all societies it is common to some form of belief in a creator God. This was excellent for extraterrestrials and found ways to communicate with Jews in a way that they would normally appear. The true nature of God is not an old, bearded man as many believe, rather God is the set of universal laws that govern the universe. God is just because the universal laws are also, God is in all of us because the universal laws are also expressed through us. Equal universal law is observed by the fact that even the most distant galaxies share the same rules as ours. The Bible. Is a grave error to take the Bible literally, because who does that is put into the hands of manipulators by altering the writings available from the weak mind what they want. The progress of humanity has only a true path and is suspicious of everything and not accept anything just because. You can have faith in something, but that does not mean you should lose the ability to reason. Even those that take us 15,000 years ahead are wrong sometimes. The true expression of freedom is to subject all views to logical reasoning, however divine that those views are proclaimed. Handlers always resort to argue that their claims are of divine origin in order to block the minds and prevent free logical reasoning. The progress of ideas must go hand in hand with the ability to dissent. Arguably, for example in Genesis it is basically a compilation of ideas and old beliefs that probably will not approach reality more than 30%. The Bible today could not be more than 60% of the events that actually occurred, not only because they were able to manipulate written later, but from the very beginning this is possible. Then how can distinguish truth from falsehood? That is where the capacity of reasoning and scientific evidence. Although you should keep in mind that philosophy does not have a process demonstration as the classical physical evidence, so it is more difficult than other science. The main interest of the aliens was to promote the idea of justice and coexistence as the main element of their religion. It is essential to coordinate large groups of population element. It was also important to promote monotheism as an instrument of progress towards the idea of a coordinator God. because it is the closest thing there is to the features that make the universal laws in the cosmos. Through the prophets like Ezekiel, the extraterrestrials were shaping the culture that later became Christianity. Some interventions in the Bible. The pillar of fire. The day the dwelling was erected, the cloud covered this, i.e. the tabernacle of witness, appearing on the dwelling like fire from evening until morning. So always happened, day, cloud covered at night and something that looked like fire. And when the cloud rose over the tabernacle, the children of Israel were put in place, and the place where the cloud abode, there the children of Israel encamped. At the command of the Lord the Israelites would set out, and the order of Yahweh they encamped, and were encamped all the time remaining on the cloud abode. Even when the cloud tarried many days over the dwelling, the Israelites watched the provisions of Yahweh and not break camp. So they did when the cloud was a few days on the dwelling. At the command of the Lord encamp and the order of the Lord they set out. When the cloud stopped only from evening till morning, and rose in the morning, they set out. Or if he stood one day and one night and then up, they also undertook the march. If the cloud remained 2 days or a month or a year on the dwelling, while remaining on it, still the Israelites camped and did not move, more by winning the cloud, they set out. At the command of Yahweh they encamped, and the order of the Lord they set out, keeping the provisions Lord, according to the order given by Lord Bassinet. Numbers 9:15. Although the activities of aliens with the Jewish people are the most notorious who have survived to this day, also maintain discrete contacts with other human populations, may be these contacts the origin of some ancient beliefs. These contacts could have influenced the origin of religions such as Buddhism or Zoroastrianism. Ezekiel. Circumstances of the first vision. In the 30th year, the 5th day of the 4th month, as I was among the captives by the river Chebar, the heavens opened, and I had visions of God. The 5th day of the month in the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim, and the word of Yahweh came to the priest Ezekiel son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and was there upon him the hand of Yahweh. I looked and saw a whirlwind coming from the north, a great cloud and a fire which turned into himself. Around it there was a glow, and at its center something like a shiny metal coming out of the fire. The 4 mysterious animals. In the middle was the likeness of 4 living creatures, whose appearance was this: they had the likeness of men, and every one had 4 faces, and each 4 wings. His feet were straight, and the solace of his feet as the sole of a calf, and which gave off sparks burnished bronze. They had human hands under their wings on all 4 sides, and each of the 4 had the same face and the same wings. Their wings touched one another. As they walked, not moved from the front, each went face forward. Their faces were as follows: a human face, a head, also had, each of the 4 face of a lion, on the right, bull's face to the left, an eagle face, back. Their faces and their wings stretched upward, each had 2 wings, that touched with another, and 2 covered their bodies. And walking, each face forward, where there took them the Spirit went, they not moved from in front of the walk. These animals had the appearance of burning, like torches, as glowing fire ran through the middle of these living beings' coals, and fire went forth lightning. And the living creatures ran and returned that glare of lightning. Ezekiel 1:5. At first glance one might say that he is referring to a device similar to a helicopter, but it's hard to tell. Chapter 4, Christianity. The great dilemma of the story is to consider whether Jesus is a divine or human, perhaps because we tend to confuse ideas with people who transmit. Arguably the ideas of Jesus were of divine origin, because all that is true and positive for society is by nature. As for the hypothesis of whether Jesus had a divine origin, my opinion is that it really came from the alien community living on Earth, but then reincarnated spirit in an earthly man. Before this mission, Jesus in the world would not be different from other beings that form the expedition, this being a mission for which everyone would be equally prepared. In any case, the hypothetical divinity of Jesus must not search but as a man in his teachings. The big question is whether the 21st century man is really prepared to accept a less divine and more human Jesus. Jesus' birth. From my point of view, the birth of Jesus took place in a completely natural way. He was not born of a virgin, but was conceived as the rest of the people. In fact, virtually nothing is known about the true facts of life. Jesus, after things in order to make more compelling stories to a society that was obsessed with the material aspects of life, were added. A man trying to save our spirit was not very interesting, when what worried the Hebrews was the struggle against the Romans and earns the daily bread with difficulty. Star of Bethlehem. This is another story that was invented later, in order to give Jesus a divine or most important aspect, relating kings or magi from the east. It is somewhat absurd to think that these three kings were to pay a visit to the scandal that this would then march. They had come, leaving Jesus in his humble manger, as if such a visit would have never existed. Even the same date of Jesus' birth is completely unknown, and the main reason for that, as we know, is that in those days and the feast of the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, which is celebrated when the sun starts to rise, and held just a few days before the supposed birth of Jesus, the Church simply appropriated the celebration. Miracles of Jesus. In fact, all the miracles of Jesus but one was invented by the apostles after his death. They were desperate to see that the teachings of Jesus did not have much echo in society. Jesus, especially among citizens, attempted to resurrect the biblical principle of love thy neighbor as thyself as an essential ethical principle, but this was forgotten. This does not mean that we have no right to defend ourselves. To teach him the other cheek was just a gesture to mean that the fact of being arrested does not mean the end of a project. The apostles decided after Jesus' death was preferable. Jesus performed miracles before a forgotten Jesus. The real miracle of Jesus was getting his word would spread throughout the land, and its exhortation for good among all human beings was heard. The question is, if the 21st century man is willing to accept a Jesus who does not work miracles, that is, if you are willing to appreciate Jesus for his teachings and not the ornaments that after all are miracles. Judas Iscariot. After the death of Jesus, Judas was considered by all as a criminal and responsible for the death of Jesus, but this is not entirely true. When Judas joined Jesus, did thinking he was joining a kind of band of adventurers who would free Israel from Roman rule, but when Jesus told him his intention not to run anymore and let catch, Judas felt betrayed, thought Jesus was abandoning their ideals, and as a result he was putting him in an embarrassing situation. Seeking a solution on the fly and found only as betray him escape the Romans who wanted to capture, Judas did not understand that Jesus tried was to save men in a spiritual sense and non-material, and be running indefinitely served no purpose, preferred sacrifice his life with the idea that perhaps that the consciences of people would be removed, as indeed it was later. Although it was the Romans who ended the life of Jesus, were actually Jewish religious leaders who instigated his death. That is why people say that Jesus was simply a Jew more. They are not very realistic because he had his own way of understanding the religion. The origin of diseases. If the human body were a machine, diseases would imbalances caused by the misuse of it. In fact, the human body is a machine, but if biological, unfortunately people do not treat your body with the care they should, arise and because of this disease. The diseases can be divided into two groups, the reversible and irreversible. Reversible arguably are the force that when a person produced your body with unhealthy habits and customs of ignorance or knowingly. These diseases can be eliminated simply by correcting the behavior that causes them. Irreversible diseases are those that are caused by external factors beyond the person, as chemical or radioactive substances into contact with the body unknowingly, and following a process without worsening habits can remedy the person. That does not mean that these diseases cannot be eradicated, but it depends rather surgery and other treatments. It is unfortunate that being 85% of diseases reversible type, doctors do not make enough emphasis on changing habits of patients and easily prescribe a chemical that in many cases the only thing they make it worse. Diseases, medications should be indicated only in cases where the abandonment of unhealthy or wrong patient behavior is not enough to solve the problem. It is also fair to say that most patients do not want sermons on their lifestyle and virtually require your doctor to prescribe them a drug. This happens because they think that drugs are as miraculous elements that can solve health problems without having to leave their bad habits and unhealthy without suffering side effects, which is a serious error. It would be highly desirable for society in general reflect seriously on this issue, we should consider the utility of a drug is inversely proportional to the amount used, can be very useful in fair quantities, but can be a poison in quantities excessive. On saints. If Jesus knew what later became his followers would surely have scandalized because create all this mythology around the apostles and others is just the opposite that Jesus wanted to preach. Worship of saints and virgins is nothing more than a form of revive the old custom of polytheism. God alone is to be worshipped, because only God is different to everyone else. After all are human beings, and divinize only leads to polytheism. The resurrection of Jesus. I believe Jesus was born like all other human beings, and their death was not different. After death his spirit left his body, because the spirit is immortal, but not only appropriate, but in every living creature of the cosmos, because life is eternal for every living creature and matter. Life in its essence is spiritual energy, and as a matter neither created nor destroyed, only transformed. Possibly after the death of Jesus's body was removed from the grave by the apostles in order to prevent it from being profaned. God and the devil. As I said, the true nature of God is not an old bearded as many people believe. God is actually the set of laws that govern the universe, laws which also act through every living being. When a person does something for the progress of society, then we can say that being a representative of God, for everything that contributes to the progress has a divine nature. The devil does not have a material existence, since it is not a living being as such but exists through people. Evil is but a disease of the spirit that occurs when you believe you can do without consequences what should not. The devil is therefore merely the expression of the mistakes made by humans when they are driven by a despotic behavior. The cure is easy: give them a punishment in the same magnitude of the crime, because if not, the criminal is increased. In this context, hell it would be only the negative consequences of our own mistakes and not a world apart, as the myths say. Ghosts and blind. For centuries there has been controversy over what are ghosts. Actually, it is what we become after the death of the physical body. As I said earlier, the spirit has eternal life, and after death the body leaves him and remains for a transitional period in a spiritual environment that can vary from case to case. Depending on the events that occurred before death, the spirit can feel connected to the world he left behind. Because it is not an insensitive being, this is the cause of the visions of ghosts. Sometimes the spirit after death refuses to leave the place where he lived, because he believes that in fact your body is still alive. This process could end with reincarnation in a new body, by this being. This would not happen if the society from which it comes out not as materialistic and children are taught from childhood eternal existence of the spirit. Clairvoyance has nothing mysterious, it comes from the inertia of nature. Just as a car that acquires a certain speed tends to follow in the same direction he had, human events too, do not change just because there are people who are more sensitive than others and can get to intuit the coming events in a way that may seem surprising, but simply follows the events because of their special sensitivity. We are used to seeing the weather forecast in the media and it seems normal, but it's just another form of clairvoyance. The difference is that in this case technical means are used and in the other case sensitivity, but it is based on the same, the ability to infer the coming events. Astrology, however, is less convincing since its origin born in worshipping the planets as gods. Really just the sun and the moon influence us, the sun by its mass and energy, and the moon by the weak attraction exerted on the earth. It is true that something can disrupt the rhythm of life of human beings, but not the way they say astrologers. Religion and democracy. One of the great current controversies is whether a democratic system should teach religion in schools. The main cause is that statesmen considered to be private organizations such religious should take care of moral education. But this is a big mistake, since the philosophical and moral education is as important as the others. Rather it is the contrary, are private religious organizations that are not necessary in a modern society since these lessons can be learned in school and through books. Therefore, necessary that teaching in schools is free the interference of religious organizations, and associations organized between parents and the education ministry. True democracy. Modern democracy began with the English Civil War of 1642, but this attempt at democracy did not really have the interest of giving power to the people, but rather take it from the feudal lords and landlords and grant the emerging bourgeois class power as they corresponded. Thus came the partnership between the bourgeoisie and the working class that eventually led to a model of democracy in which citizens simply are consulted once every 4 years, with virtually no more power of decision. A true democracy is a system in which citizens elect not just the rulers, but decide every one of the laws through a form that would be filled each month. This procedure would lead to a genuine democracy in society that had. By using methods such as internet, citizens they could be communicated continuously with state and cast their vote. So only the laws that would meet the approval of the majority would come out ahead. Chapter 5: The Descent. Many people wonder if the aliens are here, why not openly presented? The reason is simple: because the human being is not prepared for the psychological shock that this would entail. Another reason is that the aliens do not want to interfere with the pace of evolution of the Earth rather than in an indirect way, so that the inhabitants of this planet reach maturity for themselves. Many times people say that God does not exist because it allows wars or crimes, but if the higher beings interfere in such matters, which would not be divine justice, but a dictatorship, and the price to pay for that kind of peace would be very high, it would mean the loss of freedom. Humanity must progress by itself, without outside interference. If the aliens are openly displayed before time, would cause a commotion in the order of values and people would not know what to believe. Progress carries with it many changes. To these suddenly occur, if they did so they would be some unconscious. Many of the principles which now represent modern society would fall with a crash and people would feel embarrassed. Progress has to be something gradual as long as humanity is able to assimilate. Meanwhile they perform advisory functions to some people and show themselves occasionally with so-called flying saucers, and so are familiarizing people for the final encounter. Actually, as I said, all aliens have human form like us, because this is the most evolved form there in the cosmos. We have proof that it is the only one who has succeeded on Earth. On the evolutionary scale, first thing that occurs is the progress of technology, that however difficult it is simpler than the moral and philosophical progress only when the technique achieves a high degree of development, begins to complete the spiritual plane, it is later. Only then the worlds can be considered really mature. It would be traumatic for many people if aliens came and tell us that half of our most important beliefs are nonsense. This is logical in a system of evolution where there is a process of substitution, continuous ideas. It is better than what land will find the truth by itself at the right time. Roswell and Martians. In 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, United States, there was an incident which many saw as proof of the existence of extraterrestrial beings. The military claimed to have captured a flying saucer with their occupants inside. To my mind, this is one of the biggest blunders in history. How can you think about things that lead us thousands of years of technological advantage, would let the land to capture one of their rugged dishes? With its high technology, not take more than a few seconds to launch a rescue program and the damaged aircraft would be collected quickly. The truth is that in those years the Cold War was at its peak and the Americans were doing in that region several tests rocket to launch the Gemini space program. They were also experimenting with animals, mainly monkeys, to see the effects they would have. Space tests on humans. Possibly an experimental space capsule dropped out of the area allocated carrying inside these animals I mentioned. You would have shaved and put fire suits, but possibly should fail the test parachute re-entry. For the military, there were only two possibilities once this incident became public knowledge: say they are testing top secret or divert attention otherwise spontaneous and improvised manner. We chose to say that it was a UFO, leading the imagination, but diverting attention to the facts. At the end of the day, if people believe that the United States has alien ships, this would only boost your ego and prestige. The only way this really happening is that the same extraterrestrials delivered one of their ships intentionally, and that I consider very difficult. It would be so difficult for land captured a flying saucer as a tribe of Bushmen capture a U.S. aircraft carriers. These activities of the U.S. Air Force would only mission is the development of new prototypes of aircraft and space rockets, but in absolute secrecy. Alien races. Some think that extraterrestrial beings have the oversized head. From my point of view, this is nonsense, because any kind need all the organs of your body enough to be able to unwrap provided. In fact, human beings have a brain area larger than the size of his skull. What happens is that folds on itself in order to prevent the head acquires an excessive dimension. This is what gives the brain the striking form nut. A possible explanation for the apparent large size of his head would be the use of a helmet. As I explained earlier, it is only possible in the human form of the cosmos evolved species, as this is the most appropriate to express in the best way possible life expectations of an intelligent being. This does not mean they have to be absolutely equal. It is reasonable to think that may occur differences in aspects such as height or corpulence. As for the number of inhabited planets in the universe, can raise an example of its possibilities. 100 billion would be the stars that exist in our galaxy. 1 billion would be the stars that could have planets. 1 million would be inhabited planets. 1,000 would be the planets with advanced civilizations. This means that at this time there could be spaceships flying through the space, from 1,000 original planets, which in turn could generate thousands of colonies in the entire galaxy. And do not forget that we've only counted the stars of the Milky Way galaxy, but there are millions of galaxies same. This shows how fleeting that is, denying the existence of intelligent life beyond Earth, and as they have come here, we must recognize that they have the whole story to get it, i.e. do they have time on their side. It is also wrong to think that only planets with an atmosphere like Earth can be colonized. Who think this is because they underestimate what you can achieve with technology, not try to change the atmosphere of planets to colonize, but well to adapt by building protected cities whether outside. Flying saucers. Flying saucers are the main instrument for the movement of the Earth extraterrestrial beings and are designed primarily for this exclusive use. A representative characteristic of them is its great luminosity. This is not a coincidence but is caused deliberately so that people see it and become familiar with them. In some models, for weightlessness, the inner density of the ship is lowered using high temperatures. This is one of the causes of its luminosity. These ships do not use nuclear energy for propulsion, would be absurd for having the sun as close as a source of energy. They were to use this medium as dangerous to propel their ships. Solar energy is converted into hydrogen and oxygen and then used as fuel hereby. These vessels are all vertical takeoff, carrying their camouflaged fuselage engines. It is common in all advanced worlds the disappearance of the wings as a source of elevator drive, and the land will soon follow the same path in the design of its aircraft. There is also the model ships named Cigar, which are mother ships about 200 meters long. These ships float among the clouds along the routes of atmospheric currents almost without expending energy, are coated with a photosensitive material that allows them to collect solar energy. In case you want to go up into space, need not carry large amounts of fuel, as they are hoisted from space by laser ships trucks. These ships are placed on the plates about 100 kilometers altitude, and when the plate reaches 15,000 meters high emits an infrared laser beam high power that supplies the energy to go into space. Turbines absorb air and expel, accelerating to reach high altitudes, shortly before leaving the atmosphere off the laser propulsion, and use chemistry for the final stage. Another feature that sets them apart is the ability to become invisible. This is achieved by using a micro cameras that carry distributed by the fuselage. These cameras are responsible for issuing the one hand the pictures captured by the other, with the help of a computer, thus the illusory feeling that they are not in front is achieved. The missions. The main activity of aliens on Earth is primarily the study of the planet, its people, and its living beings in general. It is interesting to study the differences in the progress of the two civilizations. Upon arrival to the solar system, installed bases in some planets, Earth and the Moon on the Earth, even submarine bases, ships observation type Cigar can function as flying vehicle as submarine, by varying the inner density, as they are almost empty, although its outer shell is almost impenetrable. Scientific research and monopolize most of his time. Also they study the effect of new technologies on the human body. The results of these investigations are sent by radio to the planet. The second main activity of this expedition is in the guide plane to humans. He is trying to orient toward progress without direct interference, in order to take these developments as something natural. You cannot say, however, that all calls abductions can be attributed to this activity, since the secret intelligence services of some states may be behind some cases. It is not ruled out that any pharmaceutical company to have participated in it. Alien activity on Earth is peaceful in nature. It makes no sense to think that want to invade the planet, because if so they would have done for millennia, and there are thousands of inhabited planets in the cosmos, and for them it is easy to adapt to the atmosphere with its technology. Missionary activity is an important but discrete activity, being the most representative biblical facts of this activity. When the planet is morally and technically prepared, there will be the final contact between the two civilizations. World's End. Many leaders of sects attempt to gain control of people through fear, scare, putting them end dates, assumptions of the world that never arrive. This purpose has only one block, is its ability to reason by this tactic. But the real goal of these sects is the economic profit and the acquisition of power, and is not that in the future cannot be wars and disasters, but that does not mean that the world will continue its march natural evolution. The progress of society is characterized by a slow rate of evolution, which is followed by a much faster, when to end an evolutionary stage. Then it becomes to slow the pace of technological progress, until the end of the cosmic cycle. Once a planet reaches maturity, goes through a phase compared to a human life correspond to his adolescence, and at this stage the planet suffers many ideological and social convulsions. Once past, the planet acquires great stability and when undertakes the most appropriate way interstellar travel. Consequently, this has nothing to do with an end of the world, but rather a profound change in society, to make it more mature in the cosmos. It is at this time, when extraterrestrial beings will decide to descend to Earth openly, because then may be considered as equal to the inhabitants of this planet. Inhabited the universe. It has also been much controversy about whether there is intelligent life in space and how much. It is surprising that even those who consider themselves scientists doubt this. Just in our galaxy there are over 100 billion stars, but only 1 in 100,000 had an inhabited planet. Would be a million planets, and just one of them reaches the space stage before the land to expand its colonies and exploration expeditions throughout the universe. It is necessary to leave the conceited attitudes that deny this reality and accept this fact without fear and normality. Epilogue. My aim in this book is primarily to clarify the mystery surrounding the phenomenon of flying saucers. I have sought above all to solve the questions that many people would like to make on this subject, but which are never answered. They are certainly very risky set of statements shown here, but if we had citizens 19th century events today not believe it. There are still those who deny that man has reached the moon in a mixed display of vanity and ignorance. No progress is possible without imagination. I sincerely believe in what I have written in this book, but it seems correct analysis by the reader of its content. Constructive criticism is useful to clarify the scientific facts in any case. Anyway, I encourage the reader to follow my way and find the truth for himself. Finish.